Hello, I'm James Messiah, a poet from London, and this is a poem I wrote called Scene. A sight to see, I'm a sight to see. I live my life and look like me. But what you see is not all I be. It's true for you, it's true for me. A human being's a human being, born into sinew and seen. With little choice about the scene, I feel more like my mind is me. For you might guess on how I look, about my crannies and my nooks. And you were wrong, but it's okay. We learn something new every day. My hair was skin or height or width. It's who I am, but just a bit. There's more to me than what you see, and what you see is not all I be. I live my life and do my thing, but I am who I am within. Whatever color bees my skin, I am who I am within. Born here or there, outland or in, I am who I am within. My body's doing its own thing, but I am who I am within. Happy with the look outside, take pride in all that I may be, but all these genres, boxes, names don't completely suit the same. The type of stereo tune I play don't suit the dance I do today, and I don't want to dance today. No, I'm not going to dance today. I'm going to stand and tell you so, that as above's not so below, and as outside's not as within. These fickle beings who judge by skin, well, what a loss for some of them, who have so many problems, hating some for what's outside and taking pride in something snide. No win or prize or joy or gain, or high or hope or win or fame. I'll take what comes to me as mine, but knowing I'm more what's inside. I choose my friends and choose my foes by how they live and what's their code. I judge your style, your taste, your clothes, but not the shape of lips or nose, not color skin or texture hair. Oh, what a little nightmare. We've got so caught in sight and seeing, missing, judging human beings. Values by each one defined, and you're entitled to your find. But mine are those not such as these, who take assumptions as decrees. Mine are those who learn and know that as above, not so below. We take science and divide. We're mathematicians on this side. A calculation I have done is that there's little to be won in this present day and age by me and mine who love the page, who love all music and all art, and love all tech and magic parts, to pick not each by their merits, but by their different body bits, by the body's shape or tone, flesh and bone, oh, flesh and bone, can't help but perceive it so, for we can't see the human soul. I just think there's more to see than that which you on surface see. Same in ends of different means, but I am you, and you are me.
Well, I'd just like to formally welcome everyone to this mayoral event, Anti-Racism in London's Recovery. So before I start, I would just like to say a huge thank you to James Messiah for that beautiful poem, Seeing. Firstly, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Precious Azubike, an undergraduate student who attends the University of Warwick, and I've been working part-time in City Hall as a peer outreach worker, also known as the PALS, for the last 4 years. So I'd like to give a big shout out to my amazing team because honestly, I couldn't have done this without them. So who are the PALS, you may ask? The peer outreach workers are a group of young people from across London that help influence the mayor's policies. We are made up of around 30 young Londoners aged 15 to 25 years old from diverse backgrounds and life experiences. We bring a diversity of thought to the team, which has proven to produce amazing and impactful work. We bridge the gap between key policymakers and young people, a relationship which is vital but can often be misunderstood. We can't continue to watch this systemic social, political, and economic injustice unfold before our eyes. Black Lives Matter, they always have and they always will. I have seen a system in this country which continually perpetuates systematic racism and reproduces inequality through various structures, whether this be the workplace, education, or health. In my experience, being an undergraduate uni student from a lower socioeconomic background, attending a Russell Group university has highlighted this stark inequality. Although some support is provided, the lack of representation paves the way to be easily misunderstood, whether this is academically, emotionally, or financially. It can be discouraging and have adverse effects on your education because you feel like you are not equipped with the material and cultural capital to succeed. Sometimes you are placed with a double burden and you feel like you are working twice as hard to get half of what they get. People applaud you for being a high achiever at a high achieving uni, but they don't understand the struggle of trying to upkeep with your counterparts who can share a completely different experience with you. In the workplace, I've seen this too. So society will look at me and probably say I face four social adversities, being young, black, female, and from a working class background. But does the workplace truly support you? My experience is that the workplace expects you to have the same portfolio as your counterparts who have many doors open for them just on the basis of who they know and where they come from. Many organizations still have a long way in welcoming a truly diverse workforce. In order to move forward from the corporate and the public sector, organizations should challenge themselves to do better. My first solution would be rather than simply setting objectives and it being seen as a tick box system, it is important and necessary for organizations to care enough to listen and be more proactive to change. Another example could be the burden of representation. Diversity is not about 2 or 3 people filling a quota in a workplace where you feel the pressure to speak for all, but it's about celebrating the differences as an opportunity for inclusion and working together. The aim should be to eradicate a sense of privilege and make the difference between them and not detract individuals in the workplace. I think another solution would be to educate and open up the discussion. So recently, I was graced with the opportunity to lead, being a peer outreach worker as a project manager for Black Lives Matter, the Future Speaks event, which took place last week, November 30th. So over the last couple of months, we have been in a series of discussions with children and young people aged 7 to 25 in the aftermath of the tragic death of George Floyd. We identified some of the key systems as being the health and social sector, looking at the color of health, where structural racism and health inequities act as fundamental causes for health disparities, which can be seen in the race discrepancy in the coronavirus and also seen through Black women's experience in healthcare, also categorized under a term called misogyny. The police and judiciary system, looking at how to redesign a relationship between young people and the state, education, work and employment, looking at the dynamics of the workforce and how to promote racial equality, the media and access to creative culture and culture and identity. The event helped to act as a platform to involve different people in the conversation. Although the event was mainly aimed at young people, we decided to have a spread in age range for the workshop sessions, so both generations were in conversation with each other and learning from one another. It was essential because the future really does speak. We as the peer outreach team have also been working closely with many amazing organizations who would like to acknowledge the work being done, one being the Black Curriculum. The Black Curriculum is a social enterprise founded in 2019 by young people to address the lack of Black British history in the UK curriculum, with the aim to reimagine the future of education through Black British history. The PALs are a part of a movement of young Black Londoners who are doing amazing things. For example, me, myself, I am a co-founder of my own hair extension brand called The Hair Collective. I'm proud to be seeing other young Londoners with such amazing advocates for the Advocacy Academy, who this week are not only doing amazing work, but are launching a campaign called the Halo Collective to tackle hair discrimination in schools and the workplace. This mission is to end hair inequality, where Afro-textured hair is deemed as unsuitable or unprofessional. It is an excellent example of progressive anti-racist policy, one which we must all consider how we play a part in adopting and supporting. So I've spoken a lot today, but if there was one message I could leave you with, I would say, continue to educate, support, and donate. And remember that silence alone is the echo chamber for injustice. So speak up and do it unapologetically. In solidarity, we stand. With that being said, I would like to introduce the Mayor himself, Sadiq Khan. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Precious, for that introduction, for the work you do, and can also thank all the PALs for the work they do. Can also just say how wonderful it was to hear James as well. It's really good that we're able to support and showcase some of London's talent this morning. Can I also thank everyone who's joining us today to get involved in this vital issue. I've been the Mayor of London for 4.5 years now, and my overriding ambition remains the same today as when I was first elected, to ensure that all Londoners can access the opportunities they need to reach their full potential like I have. For the best part of my life, I never imagined that one day I'd be the mayor of the greatest city in the world. The child of immigrants, one of 8 children raised on a council estate in South London. Life wasn't always easy when I was growing up, but thanks to a welcoming city, a council home which meant we had a roof over our heads, a good state school education, and London's open, inclusive values, I was able to use the helping hand this city gave to me to find some success. This personal story and these personal experiences have been fundamental in shaping my political outlook today and my lasting ambitions for tomorrow. Because I believe that everyone, regardless of their race, faith, gender, sexuality, disability, or background, should have the same opportunities to get on in life. But depressingly, not only are we a long way from reaching this goal, but for the first time in my lifetime, I fear we're at risk of going backwards. Of course, I'm immensely proud of London and how we are one of the most diverse cities in the world, a place where, on the whole, we don't just tolerate our differences, but we respect and celebrate them. However, we're far from perfect. Hate crime has been rising, promoted by an increase in the politics of us versus them. And there's also a much deeper, more ingrained systemic racism that absolutely still exists in our city. This has been brutally exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has not just laid bare the terrible inequality and racial injustice in our society, but exasperates the problem too. If you're Black or of Pakistani or Bangladeshi origin, you're almost twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than if you're white. The employment rate for white Londoners is much higher than for Londoners from BAME Londoners. There's racial bias in our criminal justice system, with those from ethnic minority groups often receiving tougher, longer sentences, and the racial pay gap remains. All these problems exist because racism has deep roots in our society, which must not only be acknowledged, but urgently addressed. And that's why I've committed to making London a truly anti-racist city, a city where assuming there's no racism is simply not enough, and a city where we're constantly and openly questioning what we can do better. This proactive attitude is key because, worryingly, there seems to be a growing movement to try and shut down any debate about the level of racism in our country. More and more, we're seeing twisted attempts to peddle the notion that it's somehow job done in the mission of full equality, and that our focus should be elsewhere on other issues. This attitude that we should somehow be grateful for the progress that's been made reminds me of a line from a great Martin Luther King speech when he said, "There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied?" And our answer today must be just as robust as his was 60 years ago. For we should not be satisfied until our schools are working just as well for Black boys as for everyone else. We should not be satisfied until the racial pay gap is finally closed and we achieve full equality at all levels of our society. We should not be satisfied until the many systemic barriers that stand in the way of ethnic minority Londoners are lifted. And we should not be satisfied until all communities across our great city feel like they're valued and treated fairly by the public institutions that exist to serve them. The challenge we face is clear. But rather than acting with impatience that the problem deserves, our government is at best failing even to acknowledge the problem. And at worst, it's actively creating division between our communities and implementing policies that racially discriminate, such as the hostile environment and the Windrush scandal. This failure from our national government makes our role as regional and local leaders even more important. And I'm proud of the action we're taking in our city. As mayor, just like leaders in Toronto, Chicago, Rotterdam, and Bristol, I'm determined to lead from the front and to lead by example, not only with the anti-racist approach we're taking within City Hall, but with the policies we're implementing to tackle structural, direct, and indirect racism across our city. This includes the way we're laying the foundations for a fair, inclusive, and racially just recovery from this pandemic. I'm not going to go through everything we're doing in London now, as there'll be a time to discuss this during the Q&A after the speech. But to highlight just a few initiatives, we've produced an action plan to address the concerns of Black communities around policing in London. We've launched the Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm. We've partnered with the Black curriculum to ensure that London schools have high quality teaching material on Black history. We've set up the London Community Response Fund to support charities to deliver vital services to ethnic minority communities. We've persuaded the Equality and Human Rights Commission to undertake a statutory investigation into the disproportionate impact of COVID. We've funded a community response fund to help BAME organisations. We're using London's £318 million adult education budget to ensure BAME Londoners will be able to access the skills training they need to get back into work. And today, I'm announcing a new civil society roots incubator to support communities that have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. When it comes to all of this work, there's one vital thing I really want to stress. We've made sure that a common thread that runs throughout everything we do is the way we're determined to put listening and working in partnership with Londoners right at the forefront. So let me just finish with this, Precious. This issue goes to the heart of what I'm about as a politician, breaking down barriers and building the path to a more equal society, defending our precious values and standing up for all Londoners. Fundamentally, it's about ensuring everyone is equally respected, equally valued, and has a stake in our society. And I look forward to working with you all as we shape London into a truly anti-racist city, which I know we can together. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sadiq, for that amazing speech. And we've already got a high volume of questions coming in. So if we start off with the first question, this is from Alvin. So Alvin's asked, how will the mayor support anti-racism, non-profits and charities financially? How are you supporting the voluntary community sector?
A cracking question. Thanks for that. And by the way, any difficult questions I can't answer, Lord Simon Woolley's on after. He's doing all the hard ones. That's the we've always had. So it's a really important point. So look, you've got to walk the walk as well as talking the talk. And one of the things that's quite clear, and we know this from not just the great work of Operation Black Folk, other great community groups, is they need money, they need financial support, they need advocacy, they need to be mainstreamed. And so we're doing a number of things, Precious. Financially, we're helping a number of groups across our city. In my speech, I mentioned the London Community Response Fund. I've announced today an additional sum of money to help groups with monies they need to particularly help with those communities, and they are, I'm sad to say, Black, Asian, ethnic communities who've been affected really badly by the pandemic. It's also really important, Precious, for me to have them around the table. One of the things that Dr. Debbie Weeks Bernard has done with our team is to regularly engage with these groups. They have them round the table. I've got a saying when I became mayor, which is, there's no such thing as hard to reach communities. We're hard to reach. We've got to flip it around to make it easier. So what I've been doing is listening and making sure we have the policy resources to help these groups. It's really important. And one of the examples of that is today's conference.
Well, thank you for that. So another question is in by Euphemia. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly, but it says the Black community often fear the police and want nothing to do with them. How do you engage young Black people, especially young Black youth, to have better relationships with the police? Interesting.
Well, important question, Precious. You used the word trauma during your speech when it came to George Floyd. And we've got to be honest and accept, and I know this from speaking to mates who are Black in our city, is the brutal killing of George Floyd, that it's captured on video, traumatized Black people across the globe.
Yeah, 100%.
It's an issue unique to Minnesota, Minneapolis, or the USA. Listen, our police are nowhere near as brutal as some of the police in the USA. But Black people I spoke to were thinking, but for the grace of God, I could have been me, my dad, my uncle, my big brother, my son, my nephew. And so those of us that aren't Black have got to understand that and listen. Not just give empathy, but listen. And a lot of it is the legacy, as I said in my speech, around the transatlantic slavery. A lot of it is the legacy of racism that we've not addressed. A lot of it is complacency. You speak to Simon, and he's been a campaigner for decades. We've always said we're complaining about the lack of pace of progress. We never thought we'd be saying we're going backwards.
Yeah.
And policing matters, Precious. Why does policing matter? Because the police, for good reasons, have more powers than you and me, right? And how the police are policed is important because we police by consent. And so if today, as a Black Londoner, you feel unfairly treated because of the way you're stopped and searched, I can't complain if tomorrow you're less likely to report a crime, to be a witness, or join the police service. And that affects everyone. And that's why what we've done, Precious, is listen over the course of the summer to Black Londoners, listen to community activists, to groups with the police, and to have an action plan, not just talk, an action plan about to increase the trust and confidence between, in particular, Black Londoners and the police. And it's really important we address that because it affects all of us. This isn't just an issue for Black people, it's an issue for all of us to hear about this and also want to reduce crime.
Well, thank you for that, Sadiq. So another question is coming from Christian, and Christian's asking, I think many of us young Londoners struggle to know the best way to challenge racism or even highlight the issue of race inequality, especially with friends. How do you manage this, and what is the role of the allies? Very interesting question, Christian.
Fantastic question. So firstly, I first became an MP in 2005, and I remember in my maiden speech, I quoted a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the Prophet Muhammad once said, if you see an injustice, do something to stop it. If you don't feel strong enough or brave enough, or you can't stop it physically, at least say that it's wrong and articulate that it's wrong and call it out. If you can't physically stop it or call it out, at least in your heart, know it's wrong. And all of us have got to negotiate during the course of whether you're a student, whether you're working, whether you're a politician, whether you're a community leader, which lever to use to call it out. So what I do is in my group of people since I've been young, to call out things that I think are wrong, and then widen it up when I've had other positions as a lawyer or as a politician. And you've got to call people out, Precious. The word prejudice comes from two words, prejudging. Sometimes people are prejudiced without knowing they're being racist. And so sometimes it's education. Because they've never mixed and mingled and broken bread with Black people, or people of colour, people who are Muslim, or people, or certain types of women who are women and who are Black and Muslim, and or help from the LGBTQ plus community and or disabled. So we've got to educate. We've got to explain why it's wrong. We've got to explain to people why actually just because in a rap lyric the N-word is used doesn't give you permission to use the N-word.
Yeah,
the legacy of the N-word, and a lot of it is education pressures. We're lucky in London, you see. We're the most diverse city in the world. And so most non-Black people in London have got mates or teachers or doctors or friends at work who are Black, so they get common experiences. You mentioned the Halo campaign that's been launched recently.
Yeah.
Even teachers in a diverse city like London don't understand about Black hair. And that's why it's really important to never be afraid, not in a patronizing way, but to educate people, sometimes that they're not being malevolent. And I think one of the roles of leaders is to be educators as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. So our next question is from Thomas, and Thomas has said, I feel like the GLA are... Sorry, let me start again. I feel like at the GLA, there is a polite acknowledgement of Black Lives Matter, but not enough is being done quickly enough to make systematic changes. What is the designated timetable to gain greater equality quickly, and what changes are actually going to happen?
I think that's a really good question, because we as an organisation went through, let me be honest, a learning curve this summer. And many of our GLA team didn't understand really the trauma that our Black staff was feeling because of George Floyd's brutal killing, because of the disproportionate impact of the pandemic. You saw the picture of the first few people who died, all people of colour, and a number of other issues. And as an organisation, we put our hands up and said, we've got to be listening to our Black colleagues about what they're going through.
Yeah.
And that's led to a number of things we've done to put that into action. Pivoting from not simply not being racist, but to be proactively anti-racist is a good example. To make sure, and Simon can talk about this later on, when it came to our recovery plan from the pandemic, anti-racism wasn't front and centre. Actually, it was Simon's intervention that led to, in all the 9 recovery missions, it's anti-racist, by the way, not just addressing inequalities. The issue of race is really important.
Yeah.
So we've done a number of things to do that. In relation to timelines, I'm a firm believer in, transparency is important. Sunlight's the best disinfectant, but unless you measure it, you can't see it. We're publishing data in relation to pay, in relation to grades, and all those things to make sure we address the fact that the higher up you reach any organisation, the fewer Black people you see. We want to change that in City Hall. So I want us to be a beacon when it comes to London, and then London to a beacon when it comes to the rest of the world.
Thank you for that. So our next question is from Daniel, and Daniel said, there has been a massive upturn in the overt racism towards people from Southeast Asian descent, with Philippine healthcare workers represent 1/4 of COVID healthcare deaths. As a racial group, our lack of a platform/cultural presence is stark. What can be offered to our communities to change this?
Well, firstly, all of us should make sure the whole world knows that the first vaccine in the world was given by a Filipino nurse. The matron was Filipino, worked in that trust for 17 years. And so let's brag about that. It's a good example of the East and Southeast Asian community making a massive contribution to our country. But secondly, you're right in relation to the racism that the East and Southeast Asian community suffers. That has been amplified since this pandemic began, using words like the Chinese virus as President Trump. Yeah. We saw a big issue in relation to Chinese businesses and the rest. So again, Dr. Debbie Weeks-Bernard has led some work in relation to engaging with and listening to these communities. We're now in City Hall going to do a number of things to address the inequalities, the racism, discrimination suffered by these groups, as well as making sure that they have access to a number of things that they currently don't. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to skills, when it comes to making sure they can, enjoy the fruits of living in London, we're going to make sure that, again, that we don't think they're hard to reach. We make ourselves more accessible to make sure they have the potential fulfilled as well.
So another question is coming from Maggie, and Maggie has said, with the rise in unemployment because of the pandemic, especially disproportionate, which affects young people, how do you hope to provide that young Black Londoners will be able to secure jobs in the near future? Very important question, Maggie.
This is the biggest challenge we face going forward. Jobs. All the evidence so far is it's the poorest communities in London that have suffered the worst consequences of the health issue, but also, I'm afraid, the economic issues. So you look at boroughs like Brent, boroughs like Newham, boroughs like Tower Hamlets, the most diverse, and they're also seeing the biggest numbers of COVID cases in relation to the last 9 months. Also, I'm afraid, most numbers of people furloughed, and my fear is they're going to become unemployed. So we're doing a number of things. I mentioned during my speech the skills budget. We've got a budget of £300 million. We're making sure we do what we can to give these Londoners the skills they need to get back into jobs if they lose them. If they're in work, to give them the skills to get promotion. We're also doing we're also doing schemes in 2 specific areas around the construction industry and the tech, around the workforce integration network scheme. We did some work with a team in London, Jeremy Crooks and the team there, to try and see what we can do to help Black male Londoners. Because for a number of reasons, the systemic racism is one of them. They tend to be more underemployed or unemployed than other groups. We did this scheme and we saw that it had huge dividends working with Jeremy and his team there. So we've now got a toolkit, and we're asking good employers in London to use the toolkit to make sure they use the untapped potential, in particular, of young Black men in London. And the key thing, Precious, is to make sure, firstly, we skill up people of colour, particularly Black Londoners, but also other ethnic minority groups. We also make sure that we encourage the public sector and private sector to understand, actually, all the research shows by tapping into these sort of groups, your productivity improves and your profit lines increase. So it's a win-win.
Thank you for that. So another question has just come in from Malaya. And Malaya's asked, how are you working to protect the rights of migrants who don't have access to public funds and are struggling to get supports from charities that are currently acutely oversubscribed or are not operating? Very, very important question, Malaya. Thank you for asking that.
One of the things that we discovered when we first got into City Hall was the numbers of Londoners, and they're Londoners, by the way, are unregularised because of lack of documentation. So one of the things that Debbie's built on is the work done by the previous Deputy Mayor, Matthew Ryder QC, in relation to working with charities and experts to do what we can to make it easier for these Londoners to get citizenship and nationality. We all know the hostile environment that many Black Londoners have experienced, particularly the Windrush generation. That's affecting others. Some can't afford to get a lawyer. Some can't afford to pay the immigration fees. Some haven't got the documentation because they've lost it to prove that they are British and they're entitled to certain things. Often people don't realise it until they apply for university that they've not got British status. And so we've made sure that we're helping those people who've got no recourse to public funds and those people who aren't regularised. It's really important to realise, Precious, these Londoners, and the Londoners, by the way, are falling through the cracks. And so we've got a number of advisors helping us help these Londoners, because the worry is that the environment could snowball next year when we properly leave the EU, and you not simply get people of colour being discriminated against, but also EU citizens who are Londoners, have been here for some time, who aren't getting their rights, and landlords are treating them badly, discriminating against them, or employers are discriminating against them. That's why it's really important that we do what we can to make it easier for people to get their rights through either citizenship or nationality.
Well, thank you, Sadiq. That seems to be all the questions, unless we have more coming in. Let me check.
Don't worry, if there's more questions, think of the tough ones, save them for Simon.
Yeah, most definitely. But yeah, so that's all the questions. Thank you so much for hosting this.
Thank you so much.
Being a part of this Q&A session, and I'll hand it over to you then.
Thank you. Is it over to me, Precious?
Yeah, over to you, Simon. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, thank you for that, Precious. And before I begin, I want to say that I've been a bit like my brother Sadiq. I've been an activist fighting for social and racial justice for the best part of 30 years. I think probably Sadiq and I, we see ourselves as disciples of Dr. Martin Luther King. We know that he had a dream, but even more than a dream, he had a plan. And step one of that plan was to politically empower African Americans, and not to ask for justice, but to demand it. And so for the last 30 years or so, that we've been empowering African, Asians, Caribbeans, and other minority ethnic communities to be in the positions where we can forge our own fantastic future. So the first thing I want to say is I'm looking for talent. And when I hear people like you, Precious, that from a working class background, that you're in one of the red brick universities, finding your way. The mayor and I know that's not a walk in the park. That every day you go in there, you have these challenges where you walk into a room and there's not many black women like you or men. You have to own the space. I want to do two things. I want to encourage you on this wonderful journey. And I've got a marker out for you for the future as a leader. Yes, yes, yes. You, and also James too. What a wonderful poet, Sadiq. Really, really moving. The point is, and Sadiq spoke to this, that he knows in our capital, one of the greatest cities in the world, a city-state, on our doorstep, we have teeming talent. When you look at this 8 million people plus, there is talent in every corner, in every street, in every borough in this capital. He knows, I know, there's teeming talent. Our heartbreak is that talent doesn't readily have the pathways to fulfill its potential. And we are, as disciples of King, hell-bent on making sure that you and others like you and James are a great success. Now, here's the thing about this. We both know when you succeed, it's not you win and others lose. When you win, when you can become the best you can be, everybody wins. You bring that talent to our capital in culture, in business, in medicine, in law. So I'm watching out for you, and you, James. You heard it here. Watch this on Sadiq. We've seen it here first. I also want to pay tribute to my friend, Sadiq. I've known him for a long time. Even before he was a politician, he was an activist, standing shoulder to shoulder with our Doreen Lawrence in her most difficult hour. He was there with her and the family, making sure her story, her voice, her dignity was upheld. And then I remember him saying, I'm going into politics. And we said, listen, what can we do? And he's gone from MP to minister and now head of a city state. A beacon across the world for working class people, black and brown and white, to say, I want to be like him too. And then, of course, we had 2020, a year like no other, an extraordinary number of events, storms, pandemics. And we've all been convulsed by it. We've all been heartbroken by it. But here's the thing, precious. In 50 years' time, 100 years' time, historians will look back on 2020 and ask but one question. During this perfect storm, this double pandemic, this heartbreak, they will ask, what was our response? What did we do? Did we put our head in the sand? Did we tinker around the edges because we thought it was a do-gooder type of thing to do? Or did we do something dramatic? What the mayor has said is that this double pandemic has laid bare, stripped bare the most wretched, uncomfortable truths of inequality. And he said to me and others, tinkering around the edges will not be our mission. dramatic, transformative change is the opportunity that this awfulness have given us. And he went away and he said, look, Simon, brother, you've got to be part of the London recovery. I'm not asking. I'm not asking, I'm demanding. I said, where do I sign? And then I heard some of the things that they were saying. And I said to Sadiq, come on, man, what's going on? He said, what are you saying? I said, you know, we're getting drawn over here. We're getting drawn over there. He said, what are you saying? I'm saying tackling race inequality in this London recovery should be the North Star. The North Star of the London recovery. It doesn't mean that it's the exclusive star. We intersect, we interact with all the other inequalities, to gender, to LBGT, to many other inequalities, but race is the North Star. And he said, I hear you, I hear you. Let's do this. Let's do this with the police. Let's do this with this employment. Let's do this with health. Now, I want all you on this Zoom to go back and listen to or read Sadiq's speech. Because he has set down a plan. He has set down the building blocks for this city to be transformative. You know, hear this, precious. This is not just about what the mayor can do. He is standing up to show leadership, but he is looking for leadership in many other different places. Transport for London, our global economy, which is often predicated in the capital, our schools, our universities, our colleges, our young people, precious, like you. Yes, yes, you. He is saying in this London recovery, it's time for you, precious, and other young people to step out of the shadows and be the leaders that this city demands. You know, 2 weeks ago was the 65th anniversary of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, a simple, wonderful Black woman who changed our world. But it wasn't just her. It was hundreds of thousands. The Freedom Riders, precious, were no older than you. When they traveled around, they were firebombed, they were attacked. I'll finish here, but I can't tell you enough how this is so important for Sadiq and his deputy mayor, Debbie Wicks, a wonderful woman, wonderful leader, James and others. Precious, this is our time. This is our time to show what we can do. It won't be a walk in the park, but it is a glorious journey. And you will take your friends and you take your neighbors, and we will establish, it's not just putting a plaster over a gaping wound, it's a transformation that we'll do here in our city. I hope that you'll be with us on the journey. I'm going to be with my brother Sadiq. He's going to go even more grey than he is now, but he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind because he knows it's our time. Thank you for that. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Sadiq. Thank you, precious. We ain't done yet. We've got a next session. The next session now will be chaired by Dr. Debbie Weeks Bernard. She's the deputy mayor. Sadiq, can we call our deputy mayor Super Sister?
Absolutely, she is, and some.
And some. Our Super Sister will now chair other leaders from actually around the globe, around the country and around the globe in a debate. Enjoy this day. Enjoy it. Be empowered by it. And when you finish this debate, you look in the mirror and you say, what's my role? What's my role? Thank you. Over to you, Debbie, Super Sister.
Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to welcome you all to our international panel exploring racial equity in 2020. And I'm delighted to introduce deputy mayors and senior leaders from Chicago, Rotterdam, Toronto, and Bristol to discuss how these cities are addressing racism and discrimination in practical ways. I hope you found the mayor's speech both inspiring and challenging. And I'm really delighted to have the challenge of helping the mayor to tackle work on inequality, poverty reduction, and promoting integration across our city. We face a significant challenge here in London, as the mayor has outlined in his speech, and we're responding to this challenge directly, launching new initiatives and strategies that we hope will make a real difference in the lives of Londoners. And our work here on racial equity responds directly to all of the evidence that shows that people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds experience challenges driven by structural, systemic, and institutional racism. The global uprisings that arose in the wake of the George Floyd incident in the US did not happen by accident, and they reflect deep historical barriers common to those from minority ethnic, migrant, and refugee backgrounds from across the world. I know that this is a challenge faced by a range of different cities, so it's great to share the platform today with Michael, Candice, Bert, and Asha. I'll briefly introduce the whole panel, and then I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, their cities, and the work that they lead. So with me today, I have Councillor Michael Thompson, who is Deputy Mayor for the East area of the city in Toronto, Canada. Councillor Thompson is Chair of Toronto's Economic and Community Development Committee and is a member of the Executive Committee. Now in his 5th term as councillor, Michael has earned a reputation as one of Toronto's hardest working and most effective political leaders. Also with me, I have Candice Moore, who is Chief Equity Officer in the City of Chicago in the US. Candice is the first Chief Equity Officer for the City of Chicago, charged with building out a new Office of Equity and Racial Justice. From her experiences as a legal advocate and success in community-based reform efforts, she's developed a reputation as a powerful champion of change who focuses on addressing equity and racial justice. Also on the panel with me is Bert Wybenga, who's Deputy Mayor for Enforcement, Public Space, Integrations and Community in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Bert was previously Chief Commissioner, Chief of Police in Flevoland, Deputy Chief of Police and Head of Operational Matters in Amsterdam, and Police Commissioner and Deputy Chief of Police for the National Police Services Agency. He's held various police work positions on investigation, mobile unit, district team, firearms, and was police chief in the municipality of Leiden. Also joining us is Asha Craig, who is Deputy Mayor with responsibility for communities, equalities and public health at Bristol City Council here in the UK. Councillor Craig is a born and bred Bristolian. She's served her city for many years. Bristol has been a front runner in current debates about race equality in the UK. They launched a survey between the 5th of August to the 9th of September called Our City, Our Future, inviting citizens to share their views on how to build a healthier, fairer and more sustainable city that will feed into Bristol's recovery plan. I'm Debbie Weeks-Bernard. I am the Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Community Engagement and Social Mobility, and I am delighted to be joined by these very esteemed and highly experienced guests. So I've got some questions for panel members, and I'm going to start with the first question, which will give you all the opportunity just to set the scene for us, to tell us something about your city, tell us about the population, what makes it distinctive. Here in London, we're an incredibly diverse city. We speak over 300 languages, and we've got a minority ethnic population of around 40%. So it'd be really interesting to hear about some of the different sorts of demographics that your city holds, so that we can properly understand some of the issues that you might be facing whilst doing a lot of this work in your city. So I'm going to start with Michael. Tell us about your city.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Deputy Mayor and members of the panel. I'm very delighted to be with you today, in fact, as we discuss this extremely important subject matter. While it appears to be topical for some, many of us have been living with the challenges and the inequality all our lives. So I'm pleased to welcome those to the plight that many of us of African descent have been facing for centuries and so on. My city of Toronto is the largest city in Canada, the fourth largest in North America. It has a population of just under 3 million people. 52% of the population of this city were actually born outside of Canada. I am one of those. I was born in Jamaica, arrived in Canada when I was an 12-year-old boy. And so I have seen from the ground up to the position that I'm in today in Canada. Our population, in terms of its distinction, is as I said, it's been deemed as the most diverse city in the world. And Deputy Mayor, I take this because your mayor, when he was elected on election night, indicated that London was the most diverse city in the world, and apparently the BBC fact checkers were able to correct him. So I take that from the information that we received. So I'm noting that that is not my decision as to us being the most diverse. It is that it comes from the BBC. Our city is one that is young. It's just approximately 200 years young in essence. We have been able to develop and build this city on the motto that diversity is our strength. But let me be very clear. For a long time, it was just talk. Today, there is tremendous amount of measures and initiatives that are in place to address that. And of course, we'll get into that later. But our city is made up of people from all around the world. And I will say that it's a city that has low crime rate, for example. It's a city that has a tremendous amount of integration in all of the different cultural elements and so on. And it's a city that's working, certainly not as optimally as it should. And we're working to address that through many of the initiatives that we will hopefully discuss as we move forward. So I'm delighted to be part of this panel representing the city of Toronto.
Thank you so much, Michael. And yes, I will stand corrected as to which city is diverse, but I'm sure we can have a conversation about some of the different groups who we know are living and residing in both of our cities. But I do love hearing about the differences across the globe, and that was really interesting. I've learned a lot already just by listening to you. I'd like now to turn to Candice. It'd be great if you can tell us about your city in the same way that Michael has. Tell us what makes it distinctive.
Yes, it's good to be with everyone. Well, for us, it's still morning, but I bring you greetings from the city of Chicago. Chicago is the third largest city in the U.S., right under New York and LA. We have under 3 million, we're at about 2.7 million. We are, there are a lot of ways in which we can sort of talk about Chicago's diversity. So there's the sort of just demographic numbers. So based off of the last census that we had here in the US, we were at about 49% white, 30% Black, African American, about 0.3 Native American, 6.4 Asian, and 29% Latino. We just went through another census, a challenging census, both because of COVID, but also because of a lot of the political tensions around some decisions that were made. We fully anticipate that our Latino population is one of our fastest growing populations. And there's also the challenge that our African-American population is declining, both from people leaving the city, people sort of aging out, and other populations moving into the city. So we are a city that is going through demographic changes in very real ways. If you were to drive around Chicago, you would see that Chicago is a city of neighborhoods, that we have 77 neighborhoods, and people really do identify with, I'm from the South Side, I'm from the West Side, I'm from the Southwest Side. If you say a neighborhood is often synonymous with a population or has a history around different populations. We take a lot of pride in our neighborhoods, but there's also been a lot of, political tensions, a lot of inequality that has happened, especially when we talk about, for us, when we say South and West Sides, that's in a lot of ways very synonymous with our African American community. And when you look at a map of Chicago around so many different areas, you see a story of inequality that has centered and been fixated really on the South and West Sides. Whether you're talking about economic development, health outcomes, jobs, et cetera, it sort of paints a similar map. And Chicagoans know what that means. It means that there's been a lot of trauma, a lot of decisions that have been made over our history that have really produced a lot of the outcomes that we see. And so I am a part of a new administration. We're just over a year old. And my mayor, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, came into the city saying that we have a job to do. We have to start the work of righting some of the historical wrongs that have happened in the city, trying to build the type of inclusion and equity, both economically, around health. And so that has been our mission and our challenge, quite frankly. A lot of people believe that Chicago needs to change. A lot of people have very different ideas about how that change should look. And so I think our diversity is both our strength and our challenge here in the city. But we pride ourselves as sort of tough Midwesterners. And what that means is, there's sort of this, that the Midwest is kind of the heartland of the US, and Chicago's the big city. And so folks are tough here. We have cold winters, we have a lot of wind, but that's what it means to be a Chicagoan, that those things don't scare us. And so that spirit of facing a challenge is really important to us. And I think is in a lot of ways is that continues to make us resilient as a city.
Thank you so much. I can almost picture the wind and the cold just as you were describing it then. But I really love the narrative around how resilient you are as a city, not just because of the weather, but also because of the many differences that are contained within your city demographically. So that was really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Bert, I'm gonna turn to you next to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about your city and paint a picture for us also.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for the opportunity. I'm proud of the city, so I'm glad to be able to do that. And Candace, we're in the same boat when it's about weather and climate. Ice skating is a very loved hobby here, and we have the same amount of rain as in London. When Michael told about Toronto, a city that I've visited twice, I felt a little bit humble because we're smaller in the population number, less than 1 million. The greater area is 2.3 million. But I was, on the other hand, proud that we're so much older than Toronto, because we're celebrating 750 years of history of this city, which is quite a long time. The city has its basis in 3 rivers that come together here. The most important one is the Meuse. Maybe you have heard about it. And those rivers, they connect the backlands with the sea. And the port is really the main attraction of this city economically and historically. And the city is always been open to other people, to people from all over the world. And although commerce, although economy was the main driver, and not so much the human curiosity or social elements, it changed the city. It made the city open to other cultures. With Amsterdam, with which we share this history, we are the most diverse cities in the country. It's maybe nice to know that we don't have any ethnic majority anymore, because there are so many ethnic groups that every group is a minority. And more than 50% of the population has a migrant background. And our mayor is sort of a symbol for that, because he is from Morocco. This is the country where he was born. And it was quite an event that he was appointed the mayor of our city. The city has suffered from political polarization. I'm not very proud of it, but all difficult aspects of diversity have tended to become hot issues in the media, and very much an issue in political debate, and a debate without good listening to each other, without seeking the best answers always. And we have a new government now, from which I'm part, and we strive to a more third way approach in this. So we really want to connect the city, to bring the people together. So what we chose was a explicit policy on diversity, and we have become sort of renowned for it in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands seemed open to diversity, but in fact it was live and let live, and not so much living together. And inequality, mentioned by the other speakers, was a very a strong problem throughout the cities in the country. And with this new policy, we have chosen 3 pillars on which we have many actions. I can speak too long about it, Debbie, so I will keep it short. If you are interested, I will tell you more about it. But those 3 pillars, they have the names equality, the law, and connectivity. I hope I've made you curious. What happened is that while we were working on that, 2 important events occurred. One was the death of George Floyd. As a police officer, I felt ashamed, because it was a very bad picture of how you would like to perceive police work. But at first I thought it was something in America and not here. But we have seen that it crossed the ocean towards us. And thousands of people have stood alongside the River Meuse in a rally against inequality. So George Floyd was a trigger for the inequality issue in this city. And the second thing is, and then I finish my first speech, Debbie. The second thing is that we were not so much aware of our history in colonialism and slavery. Me myself, neither. I thought slavery was an issue of the United States. But we have learned now, with thorough historical research published only 2 months ago, that many important people in the Rotterdam history has made their money through slavery. And we have felt that it's very important to recognize that and to bring that into education, to bring that into the museums, and so on and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Bert. That was a really brilliant description, and I learned an awful lot as well about the history of your city. And yes, London is also a city which has accumulated enormous wealth as a result of slavery, as have many port cities within the UK and various parts of the globe. So it was really nice that you ended on that, because it made a really important link to some of the work that we're trying to do here in London. And last but definitely by no means least, I'd like to invite Asha to talk to us about Bristol. To tell us about your city, what makes it so distinctive.
Thank you, Debbie. And it's great to hear from my esteemed colleagues about their cities. Well, I think I'm the smallest of all of us. We have a population in Bristol of around 464,000 people. We are the 10th largest city in the UK, and we have the 4th highest Somali-born population in the UK. 22% of our population are non-white, and we're a very young city with a kind of median age of around 22. We host 2 of the major universities in our city, University of Bristol, University of West of England. We have over 45,000 students in our city at any one time. In terms of our diversity, there are over 45 religions and faiths practiced in the city. We speak 91 languages. I can't compete, I'm afraid, but to us, that's a lot, given the size. And we have over people from about 187 countries of birth are registered in our city. In terms of the geographical kind of makeup, we have like 34 wards across the whole city, and but 7 of our wards, 1 in 5 families live in low-income families, and they are the same wards that since I was young and got into the game of fighting for racial and social justice, nothing hasn't changed. The dial is stuck, particularly. And I'm sure it's the same for Candice and Michael and maybe Bert in certain areas of your cities. The inequality is just so compounded. But we have developed a kind of new way of working in the city. Obviously, I should remind you. I mean, we started the ball rolling with the conversations that everyone is having around the globe around legacy and statues and decolonization. We are known as a city steeped in slavery, but a history that has been hidden from citizens. So it's been a real eye-opener for many people, a lot of people in our city, about the background that Bristol had. Because a lot of people live their lives on quite a superficial level in terms of not really understanding. They're living in the here and now and not in the past. But for those of us from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, we are living that day in, day out, and obviously having to deal with the race inequality that comes with that. We are actually a very we're very, well, until COVID hit, I think outside of London, Bristol contributes the highest amount of GDP to the Treasury. And so very successful. We're like I said, we're young, we're bright. Again, I think outside of London, we've got the highest number of people with PhDs and, so very smart city. And if you Google Bristol, you will find that we're extremely progressive and we are a city of firsts. That's what I call ourselves, smart city, green city, looking at work around integration, climate, the first city to declare climate emergency, etc. So, but let's hark back to why we're here today, and that's because of the work, I suppose, that we have been very purposeful in doing since 2016, when myself and Mayor Rees were elected to Bristol City Council. And basically, I have been on a mission to redress the imbalance when it comes to race inequality. You know, I've been a poacher turned gamekeeper, but I'm using my power as a politician to work with a whole range of different partners across the city to really address race inequality. You know, in 2015, Runnymede Trust found that Bristol was the 7th worst city in the UK when it comes to tackling race inequality on every measure you could think about. And so in 2015, we set up, developed a manifesto for race inequality. And when Marvin was elected, we stood up the Commission on Race Equality, and working across the city in a new way, a new approach, a new form of city governance, which we call the Bristol One City approach. We're now engaging with over 300 different partner organizations, agencies, businesses, faith communities, voluntary and community sector organizations to provide a core infrastructure around the race ecosystem, I call it, to allow partners to really work together so that we can address this issue together, because it's something that can't be tackled alone. We cannot sit in our silos any longer. And so I'll go on to kind of share a lot of the initiatives that we have been doing. But I wouldn't say what happened in the summer was a catalyst, because we were already on that journey. But I think it's been a wake-up call for people in the city who are now, you know, they've had no choice. People were stuck in their houses, you know. We saw what happened with George Floyd. We have seen how COVID-19 has ravaged some sections of Black and Asian communities, including those who were on the front line, those who were living in poverty. And so, again, we were very purposeful about needing to address those issues right out of the trap. So I can go on and on and on. But one of the things I'm like I said, I'm more than happy to share all of the work that we've done, and I'll share links so that they can be, you know, to explain a lot of the work that we've been doing and the actions that we've been taking, not only as a local authority, but as a city.
Thank you so much, Asha, for that. This is why this conversation is so important, and I've been so excited to have it, because sharing the approaches that we're all taking in our different cities can only make our work richer. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about your work, but also sharing ideas about initiatives and interventions going forward amongst all of us after this call would be great as well. So I'm, you know, this is a really important set of conversations, certainly for us here in London. So the next question that I want to ask you is ask you all, does build on what you were saying towards the end of your answer there, Asha, and it's reflecting on the year that we've had. We've really experienced some significant global events, not least with the global response to the killing of George Floyd. And you know, it's interesting that we've already started to talk about that and how it's impacted on our work in our individual cities. But also the fact that this came in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic, and a pandemic which hasn't been a leveler, which has clearly had a detrimental impact on some communities disproportionately. And we know that it's had an impact on some of our minority ethnic communities across the globe, certainly here in the UK, that's been incredibly clear. And also it's reflected some of those big inequalities that I think we all knew existed before the pandemic hit, but which have been just exacerbated by it. So Asha, what you were saying about those who are working in some of those lower paid roles, those were the communities hard hit by the pandemic, because they are ordinarily most likely to be found working in low paid jobs which are very front facing, and jobs which put them at risk. And I think here in the UK we spent a lot of time trying to celebrate those individuals, but those individuals have been doing those jobs for an incredibly long time, and will probably continue to do that after the pandemic has left us. So the question that I want to put to all of you is that in the light of all of those significant events with Black Lives Matter, with the impact that COVID has had, what has that meant for you individually in your cities? And how has it changed or affected your approach to racial equality? And I'm going to start, I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to start with you, Asha, and then I'll go to Bert, and then to Candice, and then to Michael. But Asha, you first.
Okay, thank you. Well, as I said, I mean, we were already on this journey, and I think what has happened over the last 9-10 months has just, kind of spurred us on. And what has actually been fascinating is it's kind of like it feels like it. People, my daughters say to me, "Mum, how does it feel different?" And I said, yes, it feels different. And you know why? It's because of those young people also. But as I said, we saw Black authors, we saw certain authors getting to #1 on because people were starting to educate themselves, Black people, white people, or people of color, because, like I said, the death of George Floyd really hit home to everybody, and I think it made people sit up and take a stock of what was happening, both in their own personal lives, but even in terms of work. And I had a very difficult conversation. Myself and Marvin, the mayor, were asked to address our staff not long after the Colston statue came down, to start having that very difficult conversation about race. Because let me tell you, up until 2016, race was nowhere near on anybody's agenda or anybody's wavelength. It's a difficult subject. Everybody bats it away. As soon as you talk about it, they will spin and want to navigate. Let's talk about LGBT, or let's talk about disabled issues. But when it comes to race, no one wanted to touch it. So now we're having those very difficult conversations, and people are prepared to have those conversations. We have provided a whole range of toolkits for our managers so that they can begin to have the conversations with their staff, who I have to say, kind of spoke up, I think, when they saw our Black leadership arrive. Staff in our organization rose up and said, "We're being mistreated. No one is listening to us." And, we dealt with it, and I wasn't prepared to sweep things under the carpet, which is what many people do, particularly when it comes to race discrimination. So we dealt with it head on, and we addressed near enough all of the issues that had been arisen out of those concerns that had been raised by staff about how they were being treated. But it's about having those conversations about race. We've also seen the digital divide obviously opening up. And so we've made sure that we are made available laptops for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic parents, particularly those in those communities where they may not have access to Wi-Fi, etc. But in addition to that, I mean, we've done so many things. We've stood up a commission, a history commission, so that we can look at our past, not only our past in relation to slavery, but we will broaden it out, because Bristolians need to understand their past, to understand their present and know how to move forward. And I think, and young people are demanding it. As we've heard, young people have been making demands on their schools. We want to hear half the story that's never been told. So we've been providing materials. We're developing a One Bristol curriculum that will be rolled out into all of our primary and secondary schools. We've stood up the Commission on Race Equality that has formed new alliances and ways to work with our One City partners. We've got a Bristol Race Equality Strategic Leaders Group that has 17 of the leading public sector organizations, and we work together under one framework, looking at how we can address particularly workforce issues around inequality. And we've actually, I think we're the first city that developed a race equality data product, which basically, and for some, we had to drag them kicking and screaming because I think that the data was so bad when it showed where Black people were in their organization. But you know something, people had to bite the bullet, and we had to start from somewhere. As bad as it is, it's a baseline to enable all of our organizations to take necessary steps to kind of move forward. So taking positive action, developing leadership programs, with I think, first city to have appointed a third of our new magistrates came from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. That's never happened in the past. So we are purposeful, and we don't, and I don't suffer fools gladly, but the point is we need to take the city with us, and that's what we're trying to do.
That sounds amazing. How inspirational. Thank you so much for that, Asha. Bert, how have you been responding to the impact of Black Lives Matter, the impact of COVID in your city, and what has this meant for your work on race equality?
It's striking how much the story of Asher about Bristol is applicable here. I can almost repeat her story in broad sense and say it's about the city of Rotterdam. We were not doing nothing before Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. Absolutely not. We have a very diverse city government, of which I'm proud to be part, although a white male, 50-plus man from Rotterdam. But we are multicolored, multi-migrant, and gender. So I'm proud of that. And we had this program of 3 pillars: law enforcement, connectivity, and inequality. There were dozens of actions in that program. We did mystery guests for housing corporations to see if they were not discriminated on color, which happened horribly enough. We did door panels for pubs to see if they had a selective door policy. We did anonymous application to see what was happening on the labor market, etc. In sports, in culture, in schools, the improvement of the citizenship program of schools. So I was sort of proud of that. And now you ask me what happened with COVID, Black Lives Matter, and so on. And I must say, we just do a load more now. We do a lot extra. And I have 3 things to say about it, and I'll keep it short again. One is the process for our program is different. We didn't talk about Black people, we talked with Black people. What a huge difference. You see in the background 5 Black young people from Rotterdam. They participated in the new program. I didn't meet them for the former program. What a loss! And now they're part of it. So dialogue in the process is a real difference. Second thing is the content is more actions, more budget, more speed. And the third thing is it is top of the list now in the political agenda. Is agenda the right word? It's in our meetings. It's in our in our programs. Some people, some politicians could say 2 years ago, well, inequality is just one of the issues of the city, and now we say it's the #1 issue.
Thank you so much, Bert. Yes, and the picture behind you is brilliant. It really does demonstrate for us all who we're talking about here. We are talking about young people getting involved in Black Lives Matter, but also we're talking about our future, and we need to make sure that we're having a better, more nuanced, but more inclusive conversation about race equality for their futures. So that was brilliant, and thank you for sharing that with us. And Candice, now I'm going to come to you. How has this changed or affected your work on race equality?
Yeah, it's been really interesting for us. So I think I have to go back to how our mayor was elected. And even in her appointing this position of a chief equity officer, which is a new position, what that signaled about what she wanted to do with her administration. So our election, the outgoing mayor did not run again, and so it was a wide open field. And one of the big issues in that election was a case of Laquan McDonald, who was a young African-American man that was shot 16 times here in Chicago and was erupted the city and implicated a lot of decisions that were made by the city. And that was felt very deeply. And everyone knew that this election was going to be sort of a referendum on what had happened. Our mayor won in part because of the work that she had done to support police reform and to really be a part of the process of changing and laying out a plan for how our police department would change. She was a very strong leader in that work. And in her election, it was also a rejection of sort of typical politicians in a lot of ways. She had not served in an elected position prior to this. And there was sort of a very clear message that came out from the election that people wanted something different. People wanted it to change. People wanted this idea of more inclusion, more equity. We are a diverse city, but we are not always inclusive as we need to be, or as equitable. The sense that everyone is getting what they need to thrive in the city. And so it is on that backdrop that we approach COVID. So I should also add that, part of her coming into this administration was to say that equity is going to be front and center. Diversity is going to be front and center. Inclusion is going to be front and center. And I'm going to invest in it in my leadership. They created my position, which did not exist before, to really focus on actually supporting the city and thinking about how do you integrate this work into how we do business as a city? How do we change how we do business, how we talk about issues of race, of inequality? And then what does that mean for our actual processes? How do we change how we're doing policy work? How are we changing how we deliver outcomes? And that's a tall order, right? We're a large city government, 33,000 employees just in our city government. That's a tall order. But then COVID happens. George Floyd happens. And I think what won with COVID, a big sort of spotlight moment is when we looked at the breakdown of who was getting infected and who was dying. Right out of the gate, we saw clear disparities, particularly for African Americans in the city. And one of the things that we stood up was what we call the racial equity rapid response. It brought together leaders from those areas that we were seeing the heaviest rates of infections and death, and brought them to the table to say, what can we be doing more of? Here's what we have. Here's what we have as a city. How do we get this message? How do we get these preventative strategies? How do we get them to your communities? How should we say this to people? How should we connect? Can you be a messenger for the work? Can you help deliver some of these things? The city will back you up because this is mission critical. And it's really important that people have trust in the messenger in this moment. And one of the things that we are operating is a history of distrust of government in some areas because of the historical problems that have happened in the city. In the midst of that, George Floyd happened. And I think, it's interesting to hear other people talk about this, but it struck a nerve. It struck a nerve in the city. It struck a nerve, I think, around the world, a nerve around inequality that so many people felt. And so, which made it really hard for us because we had laid a lot of plans for reforms, but the sense of urgency was just much more intense. We need more money at a time in which we as a city had less money, right? We needed to move faster at a time where we were moving the fastest that we've ever been because of what was going on with COVID. And so I say that because there was a real tension in trying to approach this moment with the fullness of what it needs, in dealing with the constraints that we have. That doesn't mean we back off of it. That doesn't mean we step away from it, but that is still our responsibility. And as a city, I'm really proud of some of the decisions that we're making around how we're handling the pandemic and centering race and equality as a part of it, how we're thinking about our city government and what relief looks like, and how do we make sure that we're thinking about who needs resources the most in order to thrive in this moment, in order to survive, quite frankly. And really sort of integrating that into our work. But I can't sort of shy away from, I think we here in Chicago are still living in that tension of what does it look like to repair our community again, not just physically, not just from the loss of businesses, which disproportionately impact, minority-owned businesses. But how do we repair our relationships? How do we bring our folks back together in a time in which people have been isolated? And some of these things are harder than ever. So a lot of my work has really focused around that. I'm actually about to launch an effort in a couple of days here around a real healing moment that I think really resonates and connects with, I think, what Asher was laying out in a lot of ways. How do we have conversations? How do we support people in those conversations? And I'm going to borrow a few ideas that I learned from what you're doing. So thank you for that. But I do think the work continues. I think we're taking stock of this moment, sort of owning it, but then, pushing ourselves to continue to do more.
This has been incredibly inspirational, my goodness. And I've been getting some serious goosebumps just listening to all of you speak. And I think what's so exciting and important about what you've been saying, Candice, is about the way in which you are centering racial equity in the work that you are doing, because that's the way to really make the shift that we need to see. It has to be at the middle and at the center and everywhere in relation to the way that you develop policy, the way that you think about interventions, and the way that you think about your community. So that was inspirational. It was really lovely to hear. And there are so many ideas from all of you already. I've been writing them down that we need to borrow for London. But thank you. And now to Michael, the same question to you. What has happened this year impacted the work that you were doing on racial equity, race equality?
I think what we're highlighting here is there is a need for a global lens to look at this issue because it is a global problem. In Toronto, we have been at this for some time and trying to address that. We have a mayor, and as my sister city has indicated, Candice, Toronto and Chicago are sister cities, so we have a lot in common and so on, has indicated the mayor's leadership. And so we have a strong mayor here, John Tory, and he has come into office with a mandate wanting to effect change. We've had other mayors as well who have actually been working to address this particular issue. But what we have done is that we've actually set up in our structure a confronting anti-Black racism unit that is not only responsible for actually training our city staff, including our police, transit staff as well, but also looking at this issue and coming up with policies and recommendations and so on. So the key thing is that we're actually investing in this area. We're investing in Black-owned businesses. We are working with our national government, who has allocated monies to invest in Black-owned businesses as a result of COVID. We've all addressed the issue around George Floyd and what COVID has presented to us as a challenge. We too have had the experiences where the people impacted by it the most were people who are disenfranchised and people who are the frontline workers and so on. And so we are responding to that. We had been lax in our collecting of data to help us in terms of decision making and so on. We've established a data equity strategy for the City of Toronto to learn more, and it's combining with our medical officer of health and working with the province and collaborating with other levels of government. It's extremely important. It's also important in terms of our recognition that while we have always spoken about this city being diversity our strength, we haven't always, as I said earlier, lived up to our motto and so on. So there's a huge amount of work that's actually going on within the context of our city. And that work is actually being obviously allowed to disperse throughout the entire city. We've not had this political challenge where there's been seemingly that some people were being left behind politically and so on. In our situation, there's always been an effort by politicians to try to address the issue, some more successful than others. Our current administration is much more successful because not only are we walking the talk, we're also investing in the initiatives that we need to. We're addressing the issue around homelessness. We're addressing the issue around lack of shelter, lack of housing. We're addressing the issue around jobs and creating more opportunities, internship for young people, more education for those young people from the minority or the disadvantaged communities and so on, so that there's more opportunities for them and so on. So there is a lot of that. We've seen as a result of George Floyd, because more people were at home, more people were, shut-ins, if you will, and in front of them, there was, in fact, a murder that took place in front of them with an institution that is sanctioned by the government, institution that is allowed to have, guns and munitions and so on and so forth. And so that brought it home for a lot of people. And the recognition as well that racism is real. It isn't just a pretend comment that people are actually making. Systemic racism is real within our society. Biases that are conscious and unconscious are actually real. And so as a society, we have stepped up as the political leadership and say, we're not going to sit back and pretend it doesn't exist in all institutions. But what I'm really proud to say to you, Debbie, and other members of the panel, is that as a city, we've recognized this citywide. It doesn't matter what background, what culture, what color you look like. We've recognized that this is a problem that will actually affect and stymie our growth and our development. We realize that there's a need to ensure that we respond. And for those who are naysayers and disbelievers, I don't know too many of them, because either they're not pronouncing themselves or they're being quiet. But I can assure you at this point, it's my strong belief that everyone in this city recognize that there has been a problem, there has been problems, there's been systemic problems for a long time. We have a history here in Toronto, in Canada, of some 200 years of slavery. So we too have had this problem, and we want to address it. The fact of the matter is, though, that what we have to recognize globally is that unless you have people who are willing to affect change, unless you are, for example, willing to elect people who have had the lived experience and are able to step forward to work with those who may not have had the lived experience, like Bert, for example, I think that, it's a situation where it's not just a situation where Blacks are going to be the ones who are going to, if you will, get us through the finish line. It's going to take all of us, because at the end of the day, when you look from a lens globally, because I think we need to speak to that, you look at all these young people who have marched with and have stepped forward with Black Lives Matter. Many of them reflect our entire global population. We have to do a better job for them. This scourge of racism and if you will, bias are so entrenched in many of the fabrics of our institutions in our society that we too have to call them out. And those societal institutions have got to be part of the change that is going to ensure that we have economic success, we have scholastic success, we have social success, because if we don't, it leads to social unrest. And now that we know that this is a global problem, we have to take a global lens and look at it in terms of what we do. So this forum is important. I hope it's not the last.
Thank you so much, Michael. So much of what you said has resonated. I think, and I took a couple of things from what you said, but certainly the point that institutions have to be part of the change is incredibly important. I think that we have, in what's happened with Black Lives Matter, been able to have a conversation about racism which recognizes that it's structural, because I think there has been a tendency for people to understand it as being something that happens when someone calls you a name, or when you feel as though someone may have not liked or wanted to be friends with you because of the color of your skin. What has happened, I think, this year globally is that we've changed the nature of that conversation. We've enabled people to recognize that it's structural. And in that respect, institutions necessarily have to be part of that change making, because a lot of the issues reside within our institutions. And young people who protested really have shown all of our nations what that looks like and what that feels like and what the change needs to look like. It's not about changing individuals, it's about changing structures. And I really took from that, took a lot from what you said. Now, what I want to do is to just end by getting you all to think about your vision. I recognise that I've asked you some questions about the work that you're doing, about racial equality, how that work has been affected by what has happened. But what is your vision for the future? We've talked about young people a lot. And some people might say it's cheesy to talk about young people being the future, but quite frankly, they are. And we have our responsibility to work on their behalf after we've seen what they've done this summer in raising their voices. So what is your vision for your city's future in terms of inequality now? I know that's quite a big question, but can you very briefly just a couple of sentences, a couple of phrases potentially about what you think your vision for your city's future on race equality is? For us here in London, it's about mapping out what London's recovery from this pandemic will look like, both socially and economically, and tackling race inequality at the centre of that recovery to make sure that our economic recovery is for all people and our social recovery is for all people. And the only way to do that is to have race equality at the centre. But for you, I'd be really, really interested, very briefly, to hear from you what you think your city's the vision for your future looks like. And I will go back to Asha and then work my way back up the list. So Asha, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Debbie. So like yourself, we have just published our an inclusive economic recovery strategy. And when we talk inclusive, we're not playing with the word inclusive. We truly we want to walk our talk, and we make no apology for making tackling race inequality a golden thread through everything that we do in the city, policies, strategies, programs, working with our partners. And so we published a strategy around equality and inclusion, and we set out a 5-year ambition back in 2018 to systematically address inequality across all of those key pillars. Economic, people say it's about money, it's stupid, right? But the economy, education, health and mental health, well-being. In fact, it's a huge effort, and Michael's absolutely right. It's a global effort, and so one of the things that you may not be aware of, that myself, Marvin, and a few other leaders across the UK came together about 1.5 years ago because we held a conference around race in the city, and we after the conference we said we've got to do something, and it's got to go beyond Bristol. It's got to be UK. It's got to be global. So we have been holding a series of meetings, and we've established a coalition on action for race equity and justice. It's a broad coalition across healthcare, local government, and all of the key sectors, and we're working together so that we can bring an end to systemic and structural discrimination. So I'll be reaching out to each and every one of my colleagues here to join us on that journey, because I think it has to be global. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Asha. We're all looking forward to that. That sounds amazing, and I really want to be part of that, and I'm sure everyone else on the call would like to be part of that too. And I will go over to Bert to ask you about your vision very briefly.
I've already visited the beautiful cities of Toronto, London, and Chicago, but definitely Bristol is on my list now. Yeah, I love to hear about it, and the international, the port similarity is interesting, and the colonial background. What I think is that, as Michael said, systemic discrimination is there. You can deny it, but then you're, in my words, then you're stupid. You have to recognize it, and we need the perseverance to work against it. And I see it as a longer time job, which starts now. But it might even take a generation to get where we want to get. But that is what we owe the young people. And I see the young people, the cooperation with young people, it is fun to do. They are good at it. They are creative. And it's not only the young black people who do it, because I see so many youngsters as motivated as you would love them to be. There's one thing that I realized more after this panel than before, because of my colleagues here in the panel and you, Debbie. It is such an international thing, and all our cities have the same stories, the same challenge. And what I really need is the more best practices I could get my hand on, the more practical ideas, the better. So I would love to have something to keep this going on and to learn from each other and to help each other to, how did you say it, Michael, to push the baseline against discrimination further and further. Thank you very much. And thank you, colleagues, for your input.
Thank you so much, Bert, for that. That was wonderful to hear. And now to you, Candice, as well. Your vision.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Asher and Bert said, and then just add, my vision is that every Chicagoan feels empowered to do this work. And when I say empowered, that's a combination of, yes, I believe that this work needs to happen, but I also feel prepared to take it on. One of the things that I think is so important is when we're talking about inequality, government is, quickly implicated, and I think certainly rightfully so, and has a role to play. But that interfaces with what happens in the private sector and in our personal lives. And so if we really want to see the transformative impact that we want, we're necessarily talking about change in those spaces too. And so my vision is that our entire city really feels aligned on the central message of building a more inclusive and a more equal society. And that is not a threatening proposition, because I think that's also important to name, is that sometimes when we talk about these things, there are people that see that as threatening because it stands to transform what we look like right now. It pushes us out of our comforts. And that can be a threat for some folks. And it doesn't have to be. I think the vision is that we have shared mutuality. What happens to some of us impacts a whole lot of us. And I think things like COVID have demonstrated that in a much more powerful way than I could ever do. So my vision is that the city, we can braid our relationships, braid our power together, and we're producing the city that we all deserve.
Thank you so much, Candice. That was also incredibly inspiring. I'm really enjoying all your visions. They are just amazing to hear and to behold. And I've really enjoyed being on this panel with all of you. And finally, to you, Michael, please do share with us what your vision is for your city.
Certainly, thank you. Let's be very aware of the fact that this is about power for those who have power and for those who do not have power. Let's be very clear that in 2020, those who don't have power are not going to accept that they will continue not to have power. And there are those who have power that may not want to relinquish it. And so there is a requirement for us to bring about the change. So as we look at the vision in the future, we have to find a balance in which we bring people together to understand what the future holds. Because without the change in the dynamics that exist now, it isn't good. And I think that we need to talk about, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about success, when we talk about growth, when we talk about development, it has to include everyone and not just sort of lip service. It has to be about, equity, transformative. It has to be about the changes that are necessary. And what we have to realize, those in power, or those who have power structure, have to realize that there will continue to be growth in power, but it has to be shared. One of the things that we've been doing, because I've been tasked by the mayor to establish and put together a economic recovery group, and we put that group together. This report has not gotten to the council yet. It's coming on Monday. It's going to the mayor's office and others. But this report has been formed by many people, young Black people, young white people, older Blacks, older whites, and everyone in our community, to respond to the required changes that we have to put in place to address the gaps that the pandemic has been so clear to illustrate to us. So as I look at the future for this city of Toronto, I see a bright future. I see a future of change. I see a future of shifting in the imbalance. I see a future where we address the issue around systemic racism and biases and so on. I see a future that we all want, where everyone has an opportunity to grow and to develop and succeed. All of us, no matter where we come from, want the same things for our families. We want to make sure that they're safe. We want to make sure that they're educated. We want to know that when they go out, they'll come back home because we have a safe environment for them. We have the job opportunities. We have the development. We want them to enjoy and live a harmonious, happy life and lifestyle. We want them not to be viewed as suspects or about to commit crimes. We want them to be part of the holistic society that engages all of us. And let me just close by saying the following. I think that this group, because I don't think we've been able to accomplish as much as I would hope, should really look at convening again in the new year, and should also bring our staff teams together and the different resources that we have that are in place at the city to start really mapping out best practices and talk about them. And Debbie, I'll be happy to support your leadership on this. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful, happy holidays. Wish you a safe and healthy, time. And we want to come out of this in 2021. It's the best world that we can be, best cities in the world. All of us have a place to bring about this changes. And I'm so delighted to have participated in this panel with all of you. And thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you so much also, Michael. Thank you to all of you. I have greatly enjoyed hearing all of your perspectives, all of your visions, drawing on all of your expertise. I agree, Michael, we do need to reconvene. We need to have another conversation because we've only just started, I think. We've only scratched the surface. So I'd just like to thank you all for giving up your time to spend it with us. And I'm just going to end just by saying, I think that without a doubt, this has been a bit of a historical moment. I think definitely what you said, Michael, about it being a set of global issues which need global solutions is incredibly important and very relevant to the type of conversation that we've been having today. And this is historic, us having this global conversation about issues that are pertinent to our individual cities, but which are relevant across the globe is incredibly, incredibly important. So I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to spend with us today, to thank you for sharing your knowledge about what you're doing in your individual cities, and also to help us here in London to think about what it is that we need to do going forward when we think about what race equity needs to look like, not just in 2020, but also beyond. And it's a real call for holistic change. We can't do this on our own. We've recognized that in London. We're working with lots of various different partners to help us to do that. But also, I don't think the UK can do it on its own also. And so working together with all of you is the best way that we can achieve that. So thank you so much for your time. I've greatly enjoyed it. And let's pick up this conversation again. Thank you. It's been great to hear each of you share your vision for the future. I believe this has been an important historic moment, and it's vital that we recognise its global significance. You've all shared so many inspiring initiatives and ideas, and having leadership on these issues at a city level gives me hope that we can make the difference we are all seeking. Having listened and spoken with you gives me a sense of hope for a more racially equitable future. However, the issues we've spoken about today are urgent and have been plaguing our societies for far too long. The devastating and unequal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the outpouring of public anger in the wake of the killing of George Floyd has brought a renewed focus onto the many long-standing inequalities experienced by minority ethnic people. The Mayor of London has been unequivocal in naming structural racism as a key driver for these inequalities and has called for a new social contract that advances the twin causes of racial and economic equality. There is enough evidence and enough lived experience to make the case. What we need now is action, like the plans and the interventions described by this panel. There are many other cities grappling with and rising to these challenges. Here in the UK, alongside the work we are doing here in London and in Bristol, I also know that Greater Manchester's Race Equality Panel is seeking to do some important work on tackling racism. And we've already heard about the great work happening in Rotterdam, Toronto, and Chicago. The remit of today's event is focused on racial equity, but I'm acutely aware that we live in a context where race is one dimension amongst many. The negative impacts we see on marginalised groups don't arise solely out of ethnic difference, but the effects of racial discrimination and how this intersects with barriers relate to a person's class, position, ability, gender, and a range of other structural inequalities. So today's event is a call for holistic change that has real-world impact on real people. One of the key thoughts that I want to leave you with today is a reflection on the importance of demonstrating leadership for people who experience racism and other forms of inequality. I'm honoured to lead on this area of work as London's first Black female deputy mayor. I bring the experiences that I've lived through to bear on my everyday work. Experiences which include the many closed doors I've faced, the many silences that have fallen when I've walked into a room, the rolled eyes or the embarrassed shuffles when I stood up to speak, and so on and on. But it's what leaders like myself do with the responsibilities we've been given when we are given them that count. And while I may not be a deputy mayor forever, it's important for me to use this role, working for an Asian mayor who came from humble beginnings, to leave a legacy behind that cannot be undone by whoever will come after us, knowing that we have done all that we can to create a city that is socially and racially just. So thank you once again to all our speakers and our panelists, to James, Precious, Lord Woolley, Michael, Bert, Asha and Candice, and the Mayor himself. And a huge thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We look forward to continuing this work with you. Thank you.